Hello, everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Today, we have a very interesting conversation planned for you. So, we're going to be touching base on a lot of different topics relating to manufacturing, from cybersecurity to AI to obsolescence to hiring to managing change management. So, a lot of different conversations packed inside of the stories that Dave and I will be telling you all about today. That being said, if you have been here before, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. Manufacturing Hub is a podcast and a conversation live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and a couple of other platforms that we monitor for your comments. So if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, if you have any suggestions for the types of conversations we should be having, covering, or maybe even guests for the show, don't hesitate to leave us a message on any and all of those platforms. We will be releasing episodes every single week. We will be attending some of the trade shows in the industry. We have Automate that's coming up in only a couple of weeks, actually. So it's coming up pretty shortly. We have other events planned out. So if you will be at any of the events, if you want to have a conversation with Dave and I, not only about the topics that we will be covering today, but also any topics inside of the context of manufacturing, don't hesitate to reach out. If you're watching or listening on any of the platforms, make sure to leave us a comment and or like. It is definitely appreciated. It makes sure that we are part of the good side of the algorithms and we continue to deliver the right content for you. Without any further delay, Dave, if you don't have any additional comments, maybe we can start with some of our stories. But any thoughts and or comments before we begin?
No, super happy to have everyone here. Vlad wanted to. Vlad made the comment a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, how one of his favorite parts is going and listening to all of our guest stories, and he wanted to go share some of our stories. And so I thought that that was absolutely fantastic. The only thing that I'll double down on is Vlad and I will be at Automate the 12th through 14th of May coming up in Detroit. If you guys are going to be there, let us know. We've got a couple of series of conversations that we're planning to have, but I know at least me personally will get some more time this year floating out and roaming the floor, going and talking to some more people. So if you guys are going to be there, make sure to let us know. If you guys have a booth or something along those lines, please let us know so that we can go through the process of making sure that we can come see you, because that is always a lot of fun. Absolutely. Vlad, jump into let's go ahead and jump into the conversation while I try to close some tabs because I look super. Do I look super grainy to you, Vlad?
A little bit, yes.
Okay,
But
I'm
look,
gonna go close some tabs while
yes.
Vlad starts us off.
Awesome. So the context for this conversation, right? So Dave and I obviously still do a lot of work in manufacturing outside of the podcast. And so the goal was to bring some of those stories, again, obviously without mentioning any specifics and names of the customers, but ultimately to share some of our knowledge with the listeners, with the audience, and ultimately get some of your thoughts and maybe questions answered in this episode. So I will begin with some of the work that I have been doing, which is assessing some of the manufacturing plants, removing some of the obsolescence. And so the reason why, the topic of cybersecurity gets brought up in my conversations is for a very different reasons than one might believe. I am not a cybersecurity engineer. If I was to, I guess, paint a picture of myself, but ultimately, a lot of the concerns that stem out of the work that I do touch on cybersecurity. So, to paint a better picture, a lot of the C suite, I want to say, and even director to C suite executives are becoming more and more concerned with cybersecurity due to, I want to say, two different reasons. So, number one is, of course, the regulations that have passed on the European side that are, I guess, rumored to confirm to be migrating to North America. But number two, simply for the ransomware attacks that have brought down facilities, right? And so to simplify things, I guess the request comes in from the insurance side, right? And so engineers don't always understand or, I guess, appreciate that side of things. But to paint a clearer picture, basically insurance on a manufacturing facility when it comes to cybersecurity is exactly like insurance on your car or on your home with a little bit more research and details, right? So what typically happens is you have a manufacturing facility that produces x amount of dollars, and you want to ensure that no ransomware attack is going to bring it down. So ultimately there's an assessment that happens, and based on the equipment on inside of that facility, you're going to be given a quote, right? So again, not to share specific numbers, but that quote will depend on the equipment utilized in that facility as it compares to some of the other outages. So they will evaluate, for example, if a week of downtime based on what happens in the industry and your equipment is going to cost them $2 million, then your insurance premium should be covering that within 5 years. And again, I'm painting this in very broad strokes, but ultimately if you can bring the obsolescence of some of that equipment into newer equipment, reducing the risk, the premiums are going to diminish. So ultimately, they're willing to invest the delta between the two different quotes into revamping some of their systems. And that's the path of starting to audit some of the equipment, the plant floor, to understand what's currently out there in order to change. Again, obviously based on certain priorities, in which we're going to get into in just a moment. But you will be talking about PLCs, HMIs,
Mhm.
servers, PCs that are running different types of software, and so ultimately it all begins with an assessment. Any Dave questions, thoughts? I guess are you seeing similar things?
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think it's interesting. And I think you, Vlad, do more assessments than I do, especially in as broad of a stroke as we're discussing. So for me, it's always interesting for us to go have this conversation. Let me ask. So you talked about the assessment, you talked about the need for the assessment. Uh, is there a particular persona within a facility or within an enterprise that is calling out the need for these assessments? And how are you having these conversations? Who is facilitating at the enterprise level?
Sure. So typically, when it comes to cybersecurity, that almost always stems out of an IT requirement, right? So
Uh,
cybersecurity is usually under the purview of an IT vice president, or it could be a director, right? And so they will essentially have the conversation on the financial side, understand what the implications are. The company that issues the quote for insurance will ultimately do their own assessment, but that VP will initiate the conversation with the plants. At that point, it could be an engineering manager, engineering director, and somebody all obviously at the plant level, because ultimately I want to say they have a foundation of understanding what equipment they have, but they
mhm,
typically never have someone who has a complete list, not only of the parts, but also of the protocols, the
mhm,
networks. They will have some diagrams and they will have some knowledge, of course, because they run the day to day of the operation, but they don't have a deep understanding of what is obsolete, what makes sense to replace, how much is going to cost. So that's when they will also be part of those conversations and
okay.
paint a initial picture.
Absolutely. And let me ask, how receptive are the people, right? So you're coming in saying, I have to go review all of the work that you've done. Hopefully, some of it is work that they'd also like to do in the near future, but I've got to go review all of the work that's been done so I can go ahead and give this report so we can assumably talk about remediation needs. Are people on the plant normally receptive and view you as part of the team and you're coming in to help us
Mhm.
make us better? Or do people kind of view you as the outsiders coming in and we're gonna fight whatever this looks like?
So that's a very good question, right? And obviously, I spent a lot of time thinking about how to, I guess, paint a picture that is clear for the plant team that does not
Hmm.
only involve cybersecurity. Because, quite frankly, depending on whom you talk to,
Hmm.
they do not place cybersecurity as much of a higher importance as somebody else, right? So,
Hmm.
to your point, when you show up to a plant, the people there are concerned with transforming raw materials into finished
Hmm.
goods, right? That's what ultimately pays for their salary. That's what also ultimately pays for the salary of the IT folks, but they have a different pressure, to remediate some of the problems, and they understand the financial ramifications of not having let's call it cybersecurity environment. At the plant level, the conversations need to change, right? And so to your point, I almost in my head visualize that as a Venn diagram. So you need to find opportunities that to some extent help plant operations, but also solve some of the cybersecurity concerns for the individuals at the IT level, at the vice president and above levels. So ultimately, it's a balancing act. But I guess to get into maybe the assessment, I think it will be clear as to how you prioritize and how you pitch some of those projects afterwards, because the assessment is just, like I said, it's a starting point. It's just to get a clear picture of what we currently have and then
Okay.
get some ideas as to what we can remediate. But I guess the answer to your question in short, very different priorities. And you're not seen, I don't want to say that you're seen as the enemy necessarily, but you're perceived cautiously, right? Because you will be touching a lot of systems that are highly critical for production. And as you can probably expect, they're very apprehensive of trusting someone that's coming from the
Hmm.
corporate side. And they need to assess your experience of the OT environments as well, right? Because telling them, "Hey, I'm here to assess your cybersecurity concerns," immediately puts a very skeptical thought on their mind. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, I think that
Yeah,
that makes sense. And there are other questions, but why don't you go continue on in your process
sure.
talking about these assessments? And I think that some of those will be clear.
Yeah, so to get a little bit more specific on the assessment side, right? So ultimately, it is showing up to the facility, it is talking to the main stakeholders. Usually, it's going to be your engineering managers, your engineering leads, your control systems engineers, people that understand the general layout, not only of the process, but also understand some of the systems that have been put in place. And as you know, it can vary from plant to plant. And certain plants, you will have very capable teams that do a lot of that work in house. I actually have, again, like different examples, and we can get into that if you wish. But there's technicians who can program servo motion, right? And they're fully capable of remediating some of the obsolete items on their own. And then there's plant teams that have absolutely no idea about what's going on. They've been hired 4 months ago, and they're
Hmm.
just trying to keep above water, and they're firefighting on the plant floor to maintain and revamp some of the equipment. So the conversations vary greatly, but ultimately you establish a baseline from what they know, and then you start assessing, first of all, the critical items, your PLCs, your HMIs, understanding their SCADA,
Hmm.
understanding how the data flows. In some instances, it's going to be, I want to say, modern protocols, right? They're going to have your factory talk VSC, they're going to have some ignition, they're going to
Hmm.
have the latest release of Wonderware. But a lot of times it's going to be, I still see RS-232, Data Highway Plus, Control
Hmm.
Net, Device Net. And of course, some of the older systems are going to be running on, Windows 98, Windows
Hmm.
XP. So that is a whole, I want to say, can of worms of its own. So that's where the assessment starts. Like I said, understand the control systems, understand the networks, understand the protocols, and understand where does the facility currently stand. Once you, I guess, leave the plant, and to some extent, a lot of us have already built out knowledge, which components are completely obsolete, and then a little bit of research
Hmm.
is still required to understand a little bit better. Is it worth migrating some
Hmm.
of those items? So I'll give you an example, right? So for example, if you have a PLC 5 or a PLC 2, it's almost always advisable, hey, your guys are probably buying these things off eBay when they need
Hmm.
replacement parts. It is a good idea to migrate. Same goes with the protocols that I've mentioned. If it's Data Highway Plus, if it's Device Net, Control Net, a lot of those are no longer being supported or serviced by Allen Bradley. But you can have, for example, a variable frequency drive or VFD that's been in place, for 5 years, that has been purchased for $30,000. Are you
Hmm.
going to tell the customer, hey, let's replace this VFD? Even though it doesn't have an Ethernet port, I would usually argue no, it's not a critical item. You can put in something in place once it fails. So there is some
Hmm.
nuances, I guess, and some time to understand what's currently in place and propose a migration plan. As you can imagine, the typical cost of revamping an entire facility is very high, right? And the cost is not only, this is something that people who have done this would understand, it is not
Hmm.
about just throwing money at the problem. There's a lot of technical challenges associated with, for example, moving away from RSU 32 to something
Hmm.
like Ignition or Factory Talk VSC or any
Hmm.
other MES or SCADA platform for that matter, because you cannot simply rip and replace the servers that handle a lot of the data exchanges, that handle a lot of the handshakes between different controllers for, again, reasons that you probably know but we don't need to get into.
Yep.
So ultimately you need the time to make sure this is done right. So
Hmm.
usually it's not only a function of, hey, how many millions of dollars can we throw at this problem, it's also, we're probably going to need 3 to 5 years to make sure the
Hmm.
migration is complete.
Absolutely. Let me ask,
Mhm.
to go pull a bit of a Vlad and go interrupt mid thought, Vlad. So you're talking about some of these sites. Are you seeing a lot of overlap on these sites? And what I mean by that, like, are you seeing a lot of the same PLC twos or PLC fives or old iterations of compact logics? Are you seeing a lot of the same kind of out of date software? The ones who are going through the process of paying for these assessments, or is it fairly kind of varied across the board?
I would say that the hardware is certainly very similar, right? So you can identify a PLC fairly easily by the label on the side or on the front panel, and there's going to be a lot of similarity. You can almost tell what kind of equipment they're going to have in person after speaking with them. But where the complications come in, it's on the software side and on the network side, right? Because there's ultimately thousands different ways of building the same exact process and same exact system. So you will see a lot of, as we were talking a little bit off stream, there's going to be that one engineer, a couple of engineers that over the years have created this web of data that passes different tags between different machines. And so usually that's where the complexity truly lies, trying to understand what's happening at a facility from a software and network standpoint is a lot harder than just saying, hey, you have this hardware that needs to be replaced, that is the same as we see in somewhere else.
Absolutely. No, no, that does make sense. Yeah, that does make sense. And then I guess before we let you continue, are you seeing any similarities in like age of some of these things? I guess what I'm trying to get at is if I'm an organization and I still
Mhm.
run a bunch of PLC files or I still run RSView 32 or something like that, are you seeing those sort of organizations say, hey, I need this assessment, not maybe not just necessarily for cybersecurity, but to go through the process of helping to understand what, where, why I need to go to this through this migration. And also I can go leverage some of these insurance policies as a reason for this CapEx expenditure.
So I think that everyone wants to have different, leverage points for any
Hmm.
of these initiatives. I think that in my experience, it's always been, different buckets of capital
Hmm.
for a very specific initiative. And it's rarely possible, I want to say, to articulate multiple stories into one cohesive expense. What I mean by that is, again, in this case, and I guess from my work, it's been revamping cybersecurity, right? And the money comes from the fact that the premiums are going to increase.
Hmm.
In other conversations, they're trying to get access to more data, right? And although both of those initiatives will require a very similar assessment with very
Hmm.
similar, obsolescence outcomes, the buckets of money that I want to say fund those expenses are going to be different. And a lot of times it's also different teams, right? So again, if you look at large organizations, you will typically have somebody like a head of digital transformation, right? And then you're going to have a head of IT or vice president of IT. And usually they're going to have their own capital, and one of them will be concerned more with cybersecurity. The other one is going to be concerned more with digitalization, getting data. So I would say, from my experience, although both of them will benefit from whomever pays into that capex, it's usually one of them that will lead that specific initiative. Does that answer the
Okay.
question?
Absolutely. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you, Vlad. Please continue.
Yeah, and so ultimately, at the end of the assessment, like I said, we go through an evaluation process where we try to understand what equipment needs to be replaced, what equipment is still going to be good, and there is some, like I said, gray areas that you want to pay attention to, and usually that's where the expertise of control systems engineers comes in, because you understand and have worked hopefully with some of those protocols, so you can lay out a path forward to migration. Right. And going back to control systems and networks, as you can imagine, a lot of the older protocols will now be on Ethernet. Right. So none of the data highway plus, control net, or device net were meant to be open on the plant floor. So now you start talking about different architectures. Right. And as soon as you bring in the question of architectures, now you start having to make decisions. How do you connect the facility? How you're going to deploy new servers that will be accessing some of that information? Do you need to have, edge devices or data concentrators that will be
Hmm.
pulling some of that data? Now, to your point again, it's no longer a question of just cybersecurity. Now, somebody with the SCADA and MES understanding wants to come in and start maybe making some of those decisions. So you start involving more and more stakeholders as you're removing obsolescence and sort of
Hmm.
unlocking more value, not just on the insurance side, but also on the data side. And so through those conversations, you can start explaining how you can now do other things and not just, protect your site from malware. Does that make
Very
sense?
good. That does
And
make
and
sense.
so
Yes.
yeah, and so I guess to close the loop on that story, right after that comes a period of proposal submissions. Again,
Mhm.
you need to combine, as we've discussed, the site's needs. You need to
Mhm.
combine the needs of the groups, usually at the IT side in that specific instance.
Mhm.
But you also want to think about, if you're an integrator, what are your strengths and who can you bring in to execute on some of those projects? Because
Mhm.
ultimately, if you're starting to work on a new site that you're not intimately familiar with a lot of equipment being extremely obsolete, you want to be to some extent cautious as to what you tackle first. And through some of those projects, you can gain a better understanding of the site and thus deliver, I want to say, with more confidence as time goes by, right? So you start
Mhm.
proposing projects that are maybe a bit more low hanging fruit, so to speak, but
Mhm.
ultimately, like I said, kind of satisfy all three stakeholders within that triangle.
Okay. So when you're proposing these projects, I imagine it's not, hey, this is 5 years of project. Your cost is going to be $3 million, probably going to go up depending upon what hardware and labor costs look like at that 5 year stage. Are you providing them with a roadmap or a playbook of, hey, these are all of the things that we think we need done, and this is either the complete roadmap of how we think we're going to do it, or this is the first 3 to 5 things that we want to do over the first 6 months, and then we'll come back after those first 3 to 5 things and say these are the next 3 to 5 things that we have to do, all within kind of that major bucket.
Yeah, so I guess both is the answer. You provide a
Mhm.
complete map of the entire facility and what it would
Yep.
take to revamp everything. Usually, I would say that is without the cost of labor. So you're just explaining, what it would take to revamp the
Okay.
hardware as well as the software,
Just buy
what
the
that's going
hardware.
to cost.
Okay. Yeah.
Correct. And then you paint a shorter term roadmap of what you'd recommend to do over the next 6 months to a year. Right. So
Okay.
that's going to be kind of like 3 to 5 projects that you believe are the most critical. Again, it's based on your conversations with the plant, but ultimately, I think it's impossible to align the specifics of those projects before some of the internal conversations take place. So, like I said,
Hmm.
you submit 3 to 5 proposals. They usually pick 2 to 4 of them, and then you
Hmm.
start on that front.
Absolutely. And then what is the process? I guess I'm not familiar on the cybersecurity money bucket side, if you will. Are there, I guess, let me ask the question on are there more and less valuable projects in relation to opportunities on the cybersecurity side, right? So, for instance, like, is a upgrading a PLC, is that like a one, and is leaving like Logix 32 and going to a modern software like a three, and is putting a firewall in like a five? And depending upon those ratings, that would either increase or decrease the I guess the value of the projects for cybersecurity. Do you have that sort of a matrix, if you will, when you're going and looking at these projects, or is that a little bit of a ethereal? The insurance companies are going to give us a price, and we're going to do some things, and they'll give us a lower price, and we don't really know what is the most valuable of each item.
So I would say it's more of an ethereal, right?
Mhm.
Again, first of all, a lot of those numbers and specifics are not necessarily shared with us, but I
Mhm.
will say that I would imagine that even someone at the VP level probably is not super concerned with those types of details. Usually,
Yep.
and this is just an assumption, is I think that the insurance company is looking at how much money has been invested in
Okay.
revamping some of the automation equipment. And if they
Mhm.
don't see a lot of investments, I believe they just make an assumption that, hey, this is the current state of the site. So if you show that you're revamping some of the organization, you're investing money on the IT and OT sides, they start to understand, what the premiums are going to be. I believe that they just benchmark against other companies in the same vertical as you are to make that assessment, right? So there's never truly
Mhm.
specifics. But I will say again, if you're deeply invested in control systems, for example, that a Windows 98 machine is probably
Mhm.
not a good sign on the plant floor, and you probably should
Yep.
tackle that before, let's say like Windows 2016, right? So there is some
Absolutely.
right. So there is
Windows
some like common sense
2016.
understanding. Yes.
Windows 2008 didn't seem that old until you benchmarked it off of Windows 2016, which also doesn't seem that old
Right.
comparatively. But thank you for that. And then it's kind of as like a follow-up question, what is
Mhm.
the speed or velocity of these projects? Is this something, hey, this is a priority, let's go do the assessment and let's immediately roll into the remediation? Or is this, hey, this is a $2 million project over the next 5 years. We need to go find some capex money and put that in the budget, and it's going to be 3 to 12 months before we get that funded in the budget. What are those sort of what do those sort of like velocities look like?
It definitely takes a little bit of time to get to those projects, right? Because
Yep.
ultimately, like I said, the assessment takes quite a bit of time to complete. A lot of
Hmm.
conversations need to happen not only on the technical sides, but also on the budget side. A lot of times, the budget is technically there, but many
Okay.
different stakeholders are fighting for the same budget, right? The
Yep.
IT budget is anything that touches infrastructure. As you know, there's a lot of
Hmm.
obsolescence not only in the OT side, which is your PLCs, HMIs. There's a lot of servers that need to be revamped. A lot of, and we'll talk about different tools to, I
Hmm.
guess, bolster your operations on the IT
Hmm.
side. So there's a lot of people trying to fight for that same common bucket of money. But to your point, there's also conversations that need to align with the folks at the process side, right? Because you cannot just bring an entire facility down to go and FAT or VAT,
Hmm.
a month long project
Yep.
of whatever you've installed. So there's also kind of timing that needs to happen in the food and beverage space and in many other verticals. What tends to happen is there's ups and downs in production, and so they will typically schedule something that's going to be installed in this year for a very specific week or maybe a couple of weeks, and there's no other downtime available based on the projections of demand from their customers, right? So there's also those factors in play. So you simply can, even if, like I said, even if you had 10 million thrown at the problem today, you simply could not find the downtime on the
Hmm.
process to go and execute.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes sense. And I think that, especially for any listener who doesn't go live on the operation side of the plant floor, is maybe something that most people don't understand or respect is how valuable each second of uptime is. And well, downtime is expensive. The concept of taking a facility down in order to go solve a problem is extremely expensive.
Yep.
I in the last like week or couple of weeks have had a conversation with the facility, Vlad, and they have a process, and the process is significantly less than perfect. And one of the two or three ways that we could go solve this is to add dwell time between each of the processes. And I don't know who said it, but someone said it, and there was like this pause, and then we all laughed because we knew that there was no chance that we were going to go add cycle time of a cycle that cycles every 3 to 5 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 50-ish weeks a year, right? The odds
Yep.
of being able to go take it down to do that is not is something that engineering will almost never get a sign off on for a variety of good reasons. And so completely understanding the larger the facility, the more planned the downtimes are, the planned downtimes and outages are to be able to go ahead and do that. And I will
Yep.
say my favorite is how that may move as we get closer and closer to the planned outage and downtime. We may be slightly ahead or more realistically slightly behind. And the planned 2 weeks that we had really turns into, oh, sorry, guys, we ran over 2 or 3 days, so it's 10 days. And oh,
Mhm.
sorry, guys, we decided we really want to start running sooner. So your planned 2 weeks of downtime goes to 6 days on a
Yep.
shockingly regular basis. So you, as you go through these processes, have to at least internally say, we got to do everything we possibly can. We have to hopefully be able to hit this in a third or half of the time. And if it takes a little bit longer, then it'll come closer to where we are. But this is why you go through the process of, testing in your labs, testing at the factories before we go through the process of delivering it, installing it, and then it has to run.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned a lot of the challenges, that a lot of these projects experience on a very regular and frequent basis, right? And look, my point is you can test all day long. A lot of times you will be thrown a lot of curveballs, especially in these older systems, right? A lot of times you cannot simply go and download, let's say, RSU32, run it in a VM in your computer
Mhm.
and fully understand what's going on, right? Because they're passing a lot of tags with indirect addressing. There's a lot of things that are, I want to say, risky to touch. And once you get into those projects, you very quickly realize, and usually you have mitigation plans, right? If you want to
Mhm.
go back to whatever was there, but ultimately you have very finite windows. And if
Mhm.
you're not able to, close the projects off within those windows, you're going to be very quickly escorted out of the facility, right? And so
Yep.
ultimately, to your earlier question, can you plan the projects, or how long does it take to plan the projects where,
Mhm.
well, there's a lot of constraints, right? And a lot of
Mhm.
times, like I said, it is not money, it is the process side of manufacturing, because a lot of plants run very lean, right? On the equipment
Oh
side,
yeah.
there's, yeah, like they don't really sit on equipment that's not running. Everything is 24/7, 365,
Mhm.
and the only time they shut down really is for, maybe Christmas or New Year's, and
Yeah.
or sometimes, very specific periods based on accounting principles. So,
Yeah, we see lots of Christmas. I mean, if you're shutting down, we see lots of Christmas to New Year's, and
yeah.
then in the U.S. in the states, we see lots of Fourth of July's. The week of Fourth of July, if you're going to have a summer outage, is a very typical summer outage for lots of groups. I would say
Mhm.
that means that the poor maintenance folks are working overtime during those weeks because
Yep.
that is also or maintenance and engineering because that is also their 2 weeks of downtime, which means that
Yep.
they have to go through the process of uh, going through testing, doing all of the upgrades, doing everything else. I would say to that point, depending upon what the process looks like, I have if you have, I don't know, like 20 or 30 of the same thing within a facility, I have found the ability to go take two or three of them down at the same time, and it only slightly disrupts the process. And if you can go and do that while the facility is still running, but I 100% agree with Vlad. Is it's getting more and more difficult to do that, more and more difficult to find the approvals to do that. But I find that extra kind of thought and creative engineering. If all of the engineers will allow me to use the phrase, creative engineering is becoming more and more necessary in order to be successful as we go do these, because otherwise you're going to have 20 facilities and they're all going to want the same 2 weeks of your life, and you're going to want to be on vacation for those 2 weeks, but you're also going to need 20 or 30 times the number of people you have because everyone wants to go run the process at the same time.
Yep, absolutely. Dave, what story do you have for us?
Absolutely. So I want to talk about AI applications, as I had talked about in the title. And as Vlad told me as we were getting ready for this, apparently I haven't talked to him very much about. So Vlad has already got 30 minutes of questions in when it comes to this. But let me tell you guys a little bit about the AI applications. And I would say for non-long time listeners, a lot of the work that I have historically done is in the MES and I suppose down space. I'll do a little bit of the MES to ERP integrations and implementations, but only almost exclusively when they're very important for the production side work that I'm doing. Having said that, one of the things that I have prided myself on for the last decade or so is wanting to be and wanting to have knowledge of what the next cutting edge of these systems are going to look like. As I said, that the systems of the 90s were not the leading systems of the 2000s or the 2010s, and the leading systems today may or may not be the leading systems 10 or 15 years from now. So always going and looking and exploring at the what is next is of importance to me. And about for me, I don't know, about 2 years ago, I started being more and more invested and maybe more and more interested in these AI applications. And at some point, like a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 2 years ago at this point, Vlad, kind of Chat GPT hit, and all of the news outlets started talking about AI. I don't spend a lot of time listening to national or local news, but whenever I'm home, my parents will have it on, and they'll go talk about AI. And every once in a while, my mom will go send me messages about AI. And if my mom is listening to me talk about this right now, she will almost certainly have a text message on my phone talking about AI, or something that I said incorrectly when we get off the show. So for me, I find it really interesting as the forefront of what is or what could be next. Having said that, before we go into like some specific things that we're doing and that we at Kaplan are doing and things that I'm talking about, I think it's really interesting. So I would say that the requests to know more about AI, not even necessarily like applications or like a specific can we do AI in this area, but more and more requests on the AI side been picking up. I think I wrote in the show notes 12 to 18 months. It's probably been like 18 to 24 months. I've had a lot of conversations that have been picking up. And as I told Vlad on the pre-show, the part that surprises me, or maybe the part that is outside of the normal series of conversations that I'm having, is the groups that I'm having these conversations with, right? The groups who are
Mhm.
saying, hey, I run this type of facility. I am interested in talking about AI. And so I do a lot of work on the oh, Pat's got a good question here. Pat, I'll go ahead and get to that in just a minute. But the groups that I am working with and talking to outside of production, outside of engineering, right? Those are conversations that you have to some extent with folks I talk about. But like I've had a series of conversations with like the CEO of a $2+ billion organization that most people won't know what it was, but you've probably drank beer from their cans. In the past, I've had a couple of conversations with the IT staff of a premium boat builder, which was kind of very interesting. That specific business. And then I've had several conversations with HR leaders of various size groups and organizations. And I call that out to say, again, for me, it's interesting the different groups and people who are getting involved in these conversations. Lots of times, those stakeholders would be involved in conversations or projects that I'm having. But for them to be the driving force of the conversations, it is particularly interesting. And so I wanted to go ahead and call that out. So Pat's got a good Pat has a good question here, asking me the definition of AI. Is it anything that passes the Turing test? Does it only apply to chatbots, or does it also apply to advanced control and automation applications? So in my talk, Pat, I would have absolutely gotten to that next, or I would have gotten to that. I guess the best way to say it is AI is more of a customer or a client term, right? So AI is very much along the lines of AI is very much along the lines of ChatGPT. It is along the lines of, hey, someone on our board of directors or our executive suite saw the news talking about AI in manufacturing. We don't really know what AI in manufacturing is. We'd like to talk about it. When we get to Dave's definition of AI, I think the easiest answer is yes. Right. So it's those AI applications. It is the chatbots. It is certainly, in theory, at least advanced control and automation applications, but it also touches everything that we would consider like machine learning. It touches everything that we would consider like LLMs. It touches everything. It kind of touches everything, as I was going to say, towards the bottom. I find it more of the entry point into these conversations of what is AI, how can we use this greater AI, and as I told Vlad, I feel like AI is the new buzzword or term that we saw for several years. Industry 4.0 or digital transformation was. I find that lots of those people, because AI, and I should have had AI counter on this flag because I probably said it 40 times already. But I find that AI is kind of that entry point to, hey, we know we need to get better. We know that we need to have automation. We think that there is computer software or other programs that we can go and leverage. And sometimes it's a chat GPT style offering, right? So I've certainly seen more and more use of applications of chat GPT as opposed to something like Google or as opposed to something like YouTube. And that could very much be a generational thing. But I think we're seeing more and more people use AI as like software automation tools as opposed to anything else. Vlad, before I go jump into kind of what some of those offerings are and what some of those conversations are looking like, do you have any immediate questions?
I would say in general, no, right?
Okay.
Because again, my conversations have been almost in the opposite direction because, the sites that I'm going to are so behind or obsolete to
Mhm.
an extent that my immediate reaction to anyone mentioning AI is almost like, guys, we have, again, Windows 98 machines on the plant floor that nobody can purchase on eBay, even if they wanted to. So, any immediate, I guess, discussion of AI is to an extent, and I guess excluding, some other applications, but when it pertains to control systems, is almost how would I say it, unnecessary, until we get to a certain point, in my at least circles.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and do a little bit of explanation on kind of some of the services that we offer, and then we'll go jump into
Sure.
at least a couple of those in some significantly additional detail so I can go explain what that looks like. So a lot of the drivers of these conversations is workshops. Very much the, hey, we don't know what we don't know. Can you tell our executives? So they're very much executive workshops. And to be super candid with everyone listening, that 100% wasn't where they started. The offerings was not where they started a couple of years ago. It
Mhm.
started into something significantly more in depth than that. But what I found is that there is a significant need on the learning education side. So 2 and 4 day workshops. I'll go ahead and explain the differences between those in just a moment. And then, depending upon how those conversations go, is a tool selection process. So, which tools do we want to use? Which tools do we want to try? Which areas will provide the most value? And beyond that, an implementation process of those tools. Sometimes there is a desire and need for us to go in and do the physical implementation. Sometimes we act more as like a manufacturer's representative for those conversations, depending upon what those tools are. Lots of times there will be applications teams within those organizations to go ahead and do it. Sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't people in charge of, I'm just going to call it the data that the organization possesses or needs to go collect in order to go interface with that. And that can or cannot be, that is or is not, depending upon the need of the organization, something that we would offer. So on the workshops, and I think that this is kind of the most telling to Vlad's points and to Pat's points. So on the 2-day workshop, our goal is to go in on the executive side and very much is the education. So a lot of it is the baseline of AI in manufacturing, and I use AI in an exceptionally broad term. If it could be broader, I would go make it broader, but I use it in the broadest term possible, right? So what is the current state of AI in manufacturing? What are some of the tools? And then we'll go look at some of the areas. And I think the areas are really important. And I guess I should be specific when it comes to that, because the conversations that I'm going to go have with the executives are not just going to be on the production plant floor, right? So lots of times we'll see the opportunity on the production plant floor on the engineering operations maintenance side to go leverage some tools. But a lot of times we'll see tools that we can go leverage on the accounting side, on the front office side, kind of as a whole, on the sales side, et cetera, et cetera. Every group that you look at has their own AI tool. And so we will go ahead and kind of discuss each of those groups, and I'll get to the 4-day workshops in just a. I will get to the 4-day workshops in just a minute, but the important delineation is kind of there. And then we will get into kind of today and the future of AI. I suppose at the end of the day, everyone wants to know, how can I use AI today? Or more and more of the question is going to be, what is AI going to look like? If we come in more on a strategy side, I've had several conversations on the more automation AI strategy side. It's very much, how can I set myself up for success when it comes to artificial intelligence? And I have kind of boiled it down to 4 super imperfect options and offerings, right? So first, you're going to have artificial intelligence in tools. And a lot of that is going to be your chatbot style offerings. Those will potentially and almost certainly need to grow. So the example that I have in the notes is MaintainX, the CMMS. Vlad and I got to spend a bunch of time with the MaintainX team while we were at Prove It a couple of months ago. And they're building some very interesting AI tools, both internal to the specific customer, but also to the specific assets. And then they are looking ways to leverage those tools and those assets across all of their customers, and then going back to the OEM as well. So I think that that's interesting. So AI within the tools, we're going to see more and more of. You'll also see Salesforce on the sales side has AI tools within it. I think their tool is Isaac or Watson. It's one of those. And all of your major offerings are going to have tools like that. The most basic one I can for all of our Microsoft off users is Gemini. No, Copilot. Sorry, Microsoft Copilot. I cannot open up a new Microsoft account and do anything in it without a Copilot prompt or Copilot popping up. So I think that is interesting to see that more baked in there. Next, you've got your more industrial, almost certainly operation-focused tools. I like to think of those as the Siemens industrial copilots. My current understanding is that there are 3 flavors of those. I've been super interested. It's been about 24, 25 months that I've been following along the Siemens Industrial Copilot journey. We will get to go sit down with some of the Siemens Industrial Copilot folks at Automate in order to go have an update on what they're doing. We'll go bring some more of that back for year 3 of iterations. And so we see some more of that. The third bucket I find is kind of like a AI standalone tool, kind of like one tool to rule them all, something like a Palantir. And then the fourth bucket that I see is the fourth bucket that I see is the bucket of something else. And I think that the something else, the further and further we get into this, something else to come along and disrupt everything we're seeing is very possible and probable. And so kind of the continuation of those 2 days is how we set ourselves up for success. Depending upon where the organization is, a lot of it is baby steps when it comes to data collection. Yeah, a lot of it is baby steps when it comes to data collection, contextualization, integrations, and very much the how can we collect the data to be able to use tools today, but to make sure that we also control the data for our tools into the future. With that, I'm going to pause for Vlad.
I'm curious about, the initial responses, right? Because I would assume that a lot of the executives probably understand ChatGPT
Mhm,
fairly easily, right? Because I would assume that they've at least played with it. But the other tools are more difficult to not only understand, but also sell and understand the ROI from, right? So
mhm,
I guess when you're having those conversations with them, what are some of their immediate thoughts on what are some benefits besides, ChatGPT? But even on the ChatGPT side, right? Again, you can pay, let's say, for a license for the entire team. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting anything better from your side than the public chatbot.
mhm.
And kind of what are they thinking, right? Like, is HR a good area to target? Accounting? Are they trying to do it all at once? Like, what?
Mhm.
How do they even evaluate the opportunities in this space? Because I know a lot of companies are trialing things, but everyone's
Mhm.
also very, how would I say it? Not everyone's sharing information as to what's benefiting or not working for them.
Absolutely. So I think there are certainly some organizations that are trialing. I think there are a lot of organizations who are still trying to go get their feet, and they're still trying to figure out what that looks like. The other kind of major area that is always important to discuss is security, right? And so
Mm.
I suppose the more specific you are as a manufacturer, and the larger you are as a manufacturer, the more and more you're worried about your security, the more and more you need that walled garden and to own it, the more and more I see less of those groups wanting to go publish their information into a chat GPT that is owned and
Yep.
open to anyone. We'll go through and talk about specific things depending upon the groups, and a lot of those are like AI agents, and I think it's certainly very interesting. I haven't found one that we're going to go use in that kind of large industrial enterprise environment, because I haven't found anything that gives me the warm and fuzzies when it comes to security. Not that we won't see that move forward, but I think that we certainly will see that move forward. So when we talk about the options, people having tools that they already own, right? So a lot of them are going to have your Microsoft suite. And on that Microsoft suite, they're going to know what Copilot is. If they use it or not, or if they've rolled it out enterprise wide or not, is a different question and conversation. But most of them will have at least seen that. Most of them will have heard of ChatGPT. As to if they used it or not, is again kind of a different question. And so as we go and look at these specifics, it's always my goal to go talk about tools that they have that they told me that they've had, and so we can go kind of quantify as to what each of those look like, and then base the other tools that they may not know on base the other tools that they may not know on things that they do know. But again, kind of our goal in looking at those four buckets is to say these are the potentials of where we see artificial intelligence today and where we see artificial intelligence into the future. And so, because of that, again, kind of to go give them the baseline. Now, when we go talk about more and more specific examples, that is very much the goal of the 4 days of workshop. So, we'll do half a day, maybe three-quarters of a day of baseline with the executives on day one. We'll spend about a day and a half, maybe 2 days going and working with different groups within the organization to understand what their processes are. And most of the time, those groups are highlighted as potential areas of improvement before we show up, right? We're not going to be able to go give a good audit or assessment across all four, across an entire enterprise over the course of 2 days, right? It'll take you 2 days just to meet the business owners, or the vertical owners. So go through and look at each of those, and then we would come back and we would talk about specific applications. Again, a lot of those applications are applications that they may or may not have access to, and they're just looking at other better ways to go through the process of implementing. And as I believe I mentioned earlier, some of them will be on the operations plant floor, but there are a lot of efficiencies that we're seeing that are outside of the operations and plant floor. And sometimes with the need to go collect all of the data that may or may not exist operationally. I've had several of these conversations, and 100% of the information they collect is via clipboard. And junk data in, junk information out on the AI side. It would be, how do we go through the process of building something to allow us to collect actual information so that we can go through the process of actually taking that information and making better suggestions and results. So that may be a go look at accounts payable, go look at accounts receivable, go receiving, go look at warehousing, go look at these businesses and move forward with that. I would also say visual inspection, so vision cameras and other things along those lines to expedite the quality control process, especially with the continued rise, I suppose it's not the rise, the continued rise and ability use of synthetic data, being able to go and take a little bit of that artistry out of what's good versus what's not good on the vision camera and inspection side. Those are really good. Those are really good examples. What I find is most of the time there are too many examples to be able to reasonably go talk about all of them in such a short period of time. So the goal is, what are the pain points? What tools do you have that you know, so that we can go ahead and give examples that are as pointed as possible for the group there, right? And the groups that I have these conversations with, they're all extremely smart, but they may or may not know the entirety of their process or all of the software and other tools within their process. And even if they do know a fairly deep within, several of the different verticals, they may or may not be on the forefront of knowing what is the most important, what's next within these AI style tools. So a
Mhm.
lot of those workshops is on the a lot of the workshops is on the what is AI, how are people using AI, how could we use AI, and to some extent should we use AI. And then once you
Mhm.
get through that, you go look at several different tools, and potentially you go look at a tool selection process. And honestly, a lot of the time, uh, at least half or 2/3 of the conversations that we're having is we have to go through and design a system in order to have data collection, in order for us to go leverage some of these tools, because we don't have data, or we don't have good data. And if we don't have good data, that um, if we don't have good data, then it becomes really difficult to go through the process of being successful.
Let me ask you a question, right? In some of those conversations, how do you navigate? And I'm assuming this inevitably comes up, change management, right?
Mhm.
Because the reason why I ask this is I obviously see people falling in different buckets when it comes to AI. There's going to be, I want to say, some adopters who are easy to manage, but for the most part, it's either people in my mind who are overly enthusiastic and can very easily, waste a lot of time on AI tools and become completely unproductive. But on the opposite side, there's a lot of still reluctance for a variety of reasons, right, that you've mentioned. So
Mhm.
how do you assess, I don't want to say the maturity of an organization, but also, like, I'm assuming they'll ask, hey, you're proposing for us to utilize, whether that's Copilot or, a tool
Mhm.
that incorporates AI. It's not about just buying and installing the tool. It's also about following up with the people, making sure that the process is in place, and then
Mhm.
understanding, is this a net negative, net positive, right? Like, how does that maybe play out in those conversations?
So is the question on the executive side, what that implementation and change management process looks like, or is the question more on the operator, in this instance, operator focused question and conversations?
So the question is, I guess, to be more clear, if I'm an executive in that workshop, right, and I understand the technical side, but I'm concerned on how the implementation to figuring out, I guess, if it's a positive or a negative ROI for a company looks like, right? So it's more, what does the executive need to understand or is trying to understand, as to how the change management process is going to take place before we say, yes, this is great, or no, this is not so good.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, change management is change management. It's hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. To get more specific to that, we certainly have a process that we've been very successful with a bunch of organizations over nearly the last 6 or 7 years, as we go through a change management process. And that is very much focused on what are the specific benefits for the people going through the process, right? At the end of the day, if I come and say, hey, Vlad, we have to do this thing and we have to do this thing because I say so, you're probably not going to, right? Like, I have seen more people be
Mhm.
told by their direct superiors that they have to do something and they're just like, no thanks, or they just don't do the thing, than I would have possibly believed. Like, you would think that those people would either do the thing or they would no longer be employed. But lots of times there's other items at play in order to let that happen. So at the end of the day, there needs to be the groups who are going to actively be involved in the change, involved in the quote unquote designing of the system. And I talk about designing of the system, but I really mean we have to understand their pain points and we have to leverage their pain points through the entirety of the process of going and building at least the early phases of the solution. Longtime listeners of the show will know that I talk about Joe. Joe is a great guy. Joe showed up to one of my early change management meetings. About 30 minutes late for a 45 to 50-minute conversation, and he peppered me with a whole bunch of questions of why should I care about this? I've been here 35 years. Go look up on the board over here. Here are the other last 25 things that have failed. And when we finally made it to implementation, Joe was sitting there. He's like, I'm not going to go use my phone. I don't really want to be part of this. And I'm like, hey, Joe, I remember that one of your major pain points was the fact that you are really tired of having to go through the process of training a new person every 6 weeks for your particular group. And he's like, yes. And I'm like, all I'm asking you to do, Joe, is take that training that you do every 6 weeks, go put it into this tool. And then if they have any questions, they can go look at the tool via text message, via text or via video in the way that they know and understand. And we can go put QR codes of important things in important parts of the facility and they can scan it and go pop it up on their code. And then there's accountability, right? So I find a lot of the long time employees are frustrated that there's not accountability and there's huge amounts of turnover. So going and finding things. And so I guess I should once again finish the story. Man, Joe heard that, and 5 minutes later, the application was downloaded on his phone, and he was the person that was going and pushing it more than anyone else in his entire group because Joe was really tired of having to teach a new person the same thing every 6 weeks. And at the end of the day, that's how I view change management. Change management is finding someone or someones within each of the particular groups who are going to become those champions, and those to have those as the manager and supervisor is absolutely great and fantastic. But at the end of the day, it needs to be people who are out there using it and people who are going to go hold their peers accountable for using the system that they feel like they have ownership of. And it's the time intensive, laborious process of that in my experience shows the difference between projects that fail and projects that succeed. And at the end of the day, if it's important enough to the organization to say this is the next phase of the organization, if we want to continue to be an organization, these are the things that we need to do, it's worth the time and money and effort to do it right the first time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I know we're running out of time a little bit, Dave. So I do want to ask you a question on, because I've been reading a lot about this to
Hmm.
some extent, but I'm curious about these AI agents, right?
Hmm.
So I've been, I guess, like I said, trying to find more information on them. Of course, certain individuals, without mentioning the name, are trying to sell them as if they're better than sliced bread. So I'm curious to understand a little bit better what you're seeing, and ultimately, maybe a definition from you and what your experience has been on AI agents in manufacturing.
So I think AI agents are very interesting. I think that we will see them perpetuate into the realm of the enterprise and the realm of manufacturing. I should be very clear in the fact that I have not seen AI agents exist on the manufacturing floor, especially AI agents that exist on the manufacturing floor that the enterprise has agreed and said yes to.
Okay, but
Having
what's
said
an AI
that,
agent, first of all? Like,
I
let's give a
mean,
definition for this.
I have a definition. See, Vlad, I knew you were going to go ask me this question. And so I
Yes.
was thinking before we went live, how could I give a definition to a question? And honestly, Vlad, I have a definition that's going to infuriate you. AI
Mhm.
agents are like node red flows to go ask questions to different parts of LLMs on the internet. Right. So you can go ask a question, you can have it go query
Hmm.
ChatGPT 2.5 or 3.0 or 3.5, right? And then you can have that bring back some information, and then you can go run it through a Gemini or a DeepSeek or one of the other engines on the internet to go have it run through a series of queries, a series of responses, and a series of additional items, and it will go ahead and spit back something out, right? So it could be as simple as, hey, go watch this YouTube video and write a synopsis for me. And it will go pull the URL of the YouTube video. It will go have it translated over into text. It will go write a synopsis, and then you can go specify how short, how long, how technical, and from which viewpoints you would like that synopsis, right? So that in and of itself is interesting. I see the future of, instead of a Dave or a Vlad building a executive dashboard for the CEO of an organization in which they see, 5 green dots and maybe a number below it of how many cases or pallets we made over the course of the day, is the executive is going to be able to go ask, how did we do today on first shift of production? And it goes and spits out, the 3 to 5 important KPIs and metrics for it. And then it would allow them to go query deeper and deeper into that if and when they would want to do that. So I see something like that. I see something like the safety person being able to go query, hey, did something happen, or what happened at this point in time because there was a major incident. I see something like that happening. I see something like the maintenance team being able to, instead of going and looking at a bunch of PMs and dashboards and other things along those lines, I see them being able to go ask the question and query. And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be an AI agent, is, hey, what are my next 5 PMs that I need to do? Is there any major PM that needs to come up? Maybe is there any major preventative maintenance that needs to come up? When would it be scheduled during the appropriate downtime? And do I have enough of the parts and consumables to allow me to do that, right? So I think we'll go see things along those lines. And it's not necessarily going to be everyone that goes and builds them. And I think we'll certainly see more. I think we'll certainly see visual representations on top of just a lot of the text that I currently see. And what I'm kind of envisioning, Vlad, is we've got that executive dashboard. We've got a button or something that can be pressed, and it's going to go populate how first shift did or how second shift did, and go interact with some of the automation and other data collection solutions that we have. It's going to go query and hit 3 or 4 different parts of the plant and Historian and all of these other places, and go in natural language texts answer our questions. That's where I see it. I don't know anyone working. I don't know anyone reasonably working on it in a safe and secure manner that would allow me to go put this onto the plant or manufacturing floor. But I certainly see that is the direction we are going to go.
But I guess what you're saying or suggesting is that you'd
Mhm.
have customers willing to pay for something of that nature. Should it be secure, production ready, and able to tie into some currently existing systems?
Yes, but
All right.
again, I think that the major I believe there are people who would be willing or will be willing to pay for it. I think we're still early. I don't know anyone having those conversations with manufacturers. And again, the entirety
Hmm.
of the conversation that you had are people who are completely insecure, who have completely out of date hardware and software, and may or may not be appropriately pulling this back to a historian that may or may not be collecting and quantifying their data to begin with, which is where I see the majority of manufacturing. So that is a direction I see some of these tools going. I see it more of an additional tool on top of some of the other solutions that we're seeing, but I don't know any that are particularly ready for prime time yet. Remus Pop from Concept Reply, he put on a really good demonstration at Prove It in which he built a chatbot. I did not get to watch it, and I have not had a chance to watch the replay yet. But his is the closest that I've seen anyone moving in that direction.
Interesting. I'll have
I'm going to
to
go
put some thoughts into that.
You put some thoughts in that. I'm going to go answer Pat's other question as to how important is ISA 62443. And for everyone who doesn't know ISA 6243, it's basically the international standards of cybersecurity for industrial automation and control systems. I think it's a good question, Pat. I think that especially in the part of the conversation that we were having with Vlad, is it ISA 62443? That is absolutely important when it comes to cybersecurity. I think that on some of the applications, those questions are being asked. About half of the conversations I'm having is on the plant floor side. And so ISA 62443 would be more appropriate than on the other parts of the conversations that I'm having, which are more on the front office side, if you will. And so, having said that, it is important. It is important. It is something that we should strive for. It is something that we should strive to make sure that the systems that we're using and the systems that we're recommending are ISA 62443 compliant, or ISA 62443 certified. Having said that, in many of the conversations that I'm having at the executive level, ISA 62443 is not specifically called out. A lot of that is on the production operations side, if it is being called out. I honestly would imagine that we would have more of those questions than we have had. And again, I guess I'll throw it back to Vlad. Are you seeing, when you are doing these audits, Vlad, are you seeing ISA 62443 coming up, or we want to use ISA 62443 compliant certified tools?
Similar thoughts as you. I think intrinsically everybody understands where we want to get to, but it's very seldom mentioned, very explicitly. So people understand the requirements on the, again, because a lot of the initiatives that I've described at the IT side are led by professionals who are certified in cybersecurity and need to meet certain compliance requirements. It's less emphasis on the OT layers and more emphasis on the IT side as to how the data is propagated, how the servers and networking equipment is stood up. So they have that basis and understanding. So I don't see a lot of ISA standards on the cybersecurity side being mentioned.
Absolutely. Vlad, this has been awesome, everyone. We have continued the fact that we've only gotten through, I suppose, one bullet point each this time, which just kind of continues the amazing conversations we are having. Vlad and I will be back next week. Again, if you guys are going to be at Automate or at another show in the near future, please let us know. We'd like to say hi, go hang out. If you have a booth that's worth checking out, please let us know. If you guys are watching on LinkedIn, thank you guys so much. This has been awesome. Please make sure to follow Manufacturing Hub that way. Manufacturing Hub Network on LinkedIn. Please make sure to follow Vlad. Make sure to follow myself. We will be here same time, same place next Wednesday at about 4 o'clock East Coast time. If you're watching on YouTube, we've had a few YouTubers. We've had a couple of folks on Facebook. We've had a couple of folks on Twitter and Twitch. So thank you guys for watching. Give us the thumbs up button, like and share, and do all of those awesome things. If you guys have made it this far in podcast form, you're amazing. Thank you for hanging out with us every Thursday or later, whenever you guys are listening to us on your commute or walk or anything else. Give us a 5-star rating. Tell us about your friends and coworkers. This is what we're doing. Until next week, we'll